So we are live streaming on YouTube as well as on LinkedIn video and on LinkedIn audio. I'd like to thank each and everybody who is here listening to us on this live conversation. We have like 8 individuals hearing us live on LinkedIn audio. All right, so I would recommend you folks that there is a share button right at the bottom of your screen. If you see it, please share this on and put it as a post with send it to your friends, loved ones, colleagues, anybody whom you think would get value from this conversation. I'm going to start the recording now. I'm going to be playing a nice piano music and we will begin the show, and we're going to have a wonderful interview with the one and only Donald Ziraldo. All right, the Canadian icewine king is here. Okay, thanks to Wade. Wade, thank you so much for this introduction. I love you, man. I hope you do come up on stage when we do the Q&A. All right, so let me start the recording. Give us a second. Welcome to the Brand Identity Design Business Podcast. My name is Jason. I'm your host, live from Mumbai, India. And I'm very, very excited to have this exclusive interview with the one and only Donald Ziraldo, right from Canada. And this is really, really exciting. Just in case if you guys are new to my show, I want to let you know that the aim of my show is to educate entrepreneurs about business, share ideas, recommend strategies on how to deal with adversities while running a business, interesting ways how you can make money. We discuss a lot of those things, and we also interview high quality individuals who are entrepreneurs who are trying to make a big difference in this world. And my podcast is heard in over 23 countries, ranks on Spotify on the top 30% most followed business podcasts. I aim to be on the top 20% by the end of this year, and eventually I'm going to be reaching there. I see good numbers and results. I also had the opportunity to win an award from Spotify. It's called as the Anchor Spotlight Awards for January of 2023 this year, recognizing its excellence, in contribution to the podcasting industry. I want to actually quickly make a few announcements before we start this show. The first announcement which I want to make is that I have recently started offering visual identities for podcasts. So if you are an existing podcast host, and if you do have a podcast, do reach out to me. I can help you to design visual identities for them. I'm a designer myself. I do brand identities. So this is like an add-on thing which I'm doing along with this. So let me not take too much of your time. Let's actually get into this conversation. So today we would be speaking about uncorking the secrets of the wine industry with Donald Ziraldo. Thank you so much for joining on this exclusive episode, and we would be deep diving into this captivating world of wine. None other than Donald Ziraldo, who is a renowned expert, a key figure in the wine industry. In this insightful conversation, we will explore how Mr. Ziraldo's extraordinary career and his significant contribution to the wine landscape, from his early days as a wine enthusiast to becoming a trailblazing entrepreneur. Mr. Ziraldo is going to share some of the challenges he faced, some pivotal moments that shaped his passion in the viticulture industry, and moreover, some evolving trends about the wine industry and how consumer preferences has shaped his trajectory. So it's going to be a very, very fun conversation. Now, just in case if you don't know who Mr. Donald Ziraldo is, again, he's a renowned figure in the Canadian wine industry, widely recognized in pioneering his contribution in putting Canadian wines on the world map. He also founded Inniskillinwines in 1975, which went from becoming a household brand and a leading wine producer in Canada. And under his leadership, Inniskillin won numerous international awards, including the prestigious Grand Prix d'Honneur. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, in Bordeaux, France. Is one of the biggest achievement which you can ever get. Being a winemaker. So that was very, very incredible. When I read through your bio, that was simply spectacular. Mr. Ziraldo is also known for his significant role in establishing the VQA, which is called as the Vintners Quality Alliance. You will see this under labeling. If you have seen those ice wines or any sort of wines, if it has a VQA, that's quality standard. The highest standard for Canadian wines, helping to establish a thriving wine industry in the country. He has also been a recipient of numerous honors and awards. If you go through his website, he has 30 plus awards. I lost count because there were so many, including the Order of Ontario and even the Order of Canada for his contribution to the Canadian wine industry and his philanthropic work. So please welcome Mr. Ziraldo. Guys, let's actually hear some virtual noise. Let's make some noise for Mr. Ziraldo. So lovely to have you on my show, Mr. Ziraldo. Thank you so much for being here. All right, so I'm so sorry. I think you were on mute, so let's try that again. Okay, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be joining you today.
Absolutely. So let's actually deep dive into this conversation. I have a lot of questions. Okay, let's start off with which I asked you before the show. I don't know if you guys have seen the actual logo of Ziraldo Winery Real Estate Wines. So it has a woman's figure, okay, on it, and I was just asking this question to Mrs. Ziraldo, of your dreams, like how did you end up choosing that as your logo? So I wanted to hear a little backstory. Could you help our audience understand like what was the reason behind that? And I'm gonna share the screen and show that crest. Right, so if you guys are watching this live, you should be able to see this. So a woman in this imagery, that is your logo. So let's hear about that first.
So let's start off by saying the woman is Mother Nature, which I have to, any vintner has to deal with on a day-to-day.
All right, so we had just a little connection issue, so give us a second. I'm just waiting for him to come back. All right. A little technical glitch. So while we're actually waiting, so let's hear some music again. All right. So I think Mrs. Ziraldo is back up. Can you say something, Mrs. Ziraldo? Just want to make sure we are able to hear you. I can't see you though. The video feed has stopped. Since we're just trying to sort this out, guys. So give us a second. So, oh yeah,
Are we back?
yeah. We are. Okay. So
I don't know what happened.
yeah, that's okay. That's
Sorry,
okay.
I'll do it over quick. I'm not sure how we missed, but basically the woman is Mother Nature. And what I did was I took it in an Art Deco style because I collect Art Deco. So I created this as Mother Nature, the sunshine, which is ripening the grapes, and the basket that you see there is a torchio, which is what we use. It's a wine press from traditional winemaking in the old days. And the reason we use that press is because the actual press that we use now, which are pneumatic presses, are really difficult because those grapes are frozen. When you press them, they press into a very solid block of ice. Whereas this thing can be dismantled. You take the grapes out and then you reintroduce them to squeeze the grapes and get the juice out that you require at -10 Celsius, which sort of puts it all in perspective. I'm sure in India you never see those kind of temperatures.
We don't actually. So this is really exciting. So I appreciate you giving us that backstory because everything this guy does, there has to be some meaning or reason behind this. There's nothing, out of the natural or something random. Everything has some meaning to it. So let's actually
Jason,
begin
just
out.
on
Go
that
ahead.
note, when you said earlier about, things that can be learned, one of the things that I see too often in marketing is that people do uh, marketing, creative graphics. It really needs to be an icon that's going to stick with people. So the lettering is Art Deco, and there are a few, very big brands, and if you notice, they're iconic and they stick no matter where you put them. I mean, Apple, um, any Nike shoes. So that's really the objective: is you want to create a brand that people are going to be able to recognize instantly. Google has one, Microsoft has one, and the successful brands all seem to have it. If you don't get the right icon, you're going to have trouble getting people to identify with your brand.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I am with you 100%. As a designer, I also agree with you 100%. All right. So let's move on to our interview because I have a lot of questions which I like to ask you. So the first question which I want to ask you, Mr. Ziraldo, is that can you take us back to your earliest memory of wine? And can you share the experience that influenced your journey in the wine industry? Have you ever thought you would have been a part of such a big industry? Have you ever imagined back in the days, like, I'm going to end up being here doing all these amazing things?
Well, I'll take you right back from the beginning. As a son in a young Italian family, I was probably 10 years old, like my son Aspen is now, 10 years old. And my dad poured me a glass of wine, I guess, and I just he puts a little water in it, of course, as is the Italian tradition with young people. And so that was my first taste. I know that my dad had a farm, a small farm. He had tender fruit, and he grew grapes, peaches, apples, whatever was necessary for a mixed farm. And I went to university. I was always interested in wine, grapes that grow here in the Niagara region. And I really was sort of firstly introduced by producing grapevines in the nursery. So I was propagating plant material. And at one point, it occurred to me that maybe we should start thinking about planting European varieties here in the Niagara Peninsula, where we're able to grow peaches and cherries. And contrary to what people think that it's the frozen north, we do grow grapes, peaches, and we can ripen them. What we are blessed with is cold winters that as November approaches, the temperature drops dramatically. And then we pick ice wine in a window that we describe between December 15th and January the 15th. That's kind of the window. The VQA regulation stipulates it must be -8 Celsius to pick the grapes. And we generally like to go to -10 because then you get a higher concentration of aromas, flavors, and of course less yield, which makes it much more expensive. But that's the fundamental basis of the ice wine. And it originated in Germany back in the 17th century. And my partner, Carl Kaiser, brought the idea when he came here. He made a Canadian girl Sylvia, and he came one day to buy some plants. One thing led to another. We started the first winery in Canada in 1975, since Prohibition in 1929. And one day he asked me if I would like to leave some grapes on the vine to freeze. I actually thought he was kidding. I thought maybe he'd had too many glasses of wine and was sort of dreaming something, but we did, and I'll share that story with you of how it all occurred.
That is really interesting. I'm really excited to actually know more. I was wondering, uh, why did you decide to go with the hybrid grapes? Like, was it your intuition, or was it just a random idea, or was it the geography where you were and you thought that would be the best
Well,
kind of grape?
it was a combination of factors. One is because my dad had some hybrids that he was making wine for himself because he didn't like the native taste of the native grape, which is Concord. It has a compound called methylphenolate, and the Italians call it fragolino. So most, I'd say 95, 99% of the wine in the world is made from what we call or refer to as vitis vinifera. And vitis vinifera is varieties like Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and that really is the varieties that dominate the world, particularly in the premium wine sector. The hybrids were a solution to a problem in the mid 1800s when a phylloxera epidemic, which is a root louse, attacked the European vines. So two solutions. One is to cross the vines. In other words, you take a European variety and you cross it with the North American wild Vitis riparia, and that builds the resistance into the plant. However, that's a hybrid, and it's not allowed under international law for wines like Appellation Contrôlée in France. So that's how we started because we felt that was a compromise. But then we quickly learned that if we changed our habits in the husbandry or the way we manage the vineyards, then we could grow vinifera with great care because in the winter, the freeze that creates the ice wine also may damage the vines. But as we learned and we had gained more experience, we're able to do that. And the microclimate that we're in, which is dictated by the Lake Ontario, which is one of the 5 Great Lakes, very deep, moderates the climate. And it's got buffer, which is the Niagara Escarpment, which is about 100 meters high. And it's where Niagara Falls comes over, which is why it's become such a famous region. 13 million visitors come to Niagara Falls from all over the world, India, of course, everywhere. And that little zone is about the size of Burgundy or Napa Valley. And it's a microclimate that allows us to grow the grapes. And in the book that I wrote about ice wine, it illustrates that phenomena of both the climate and the escarpment and the lake moderating the climate so that we ripen the fruit in the summertime. And then the cold comes in December, January, freezes the grapes. And the law states, which we were very, very hardworking to get the law incorporated into national rules, took us 17 years. You must pick the grapes frozen on the vine. It's against the law to throw them in a refrigerator. Otherwise, anybody could do it. So Canada, Germany, Washington State, Austria, a little bit in Switzerland. So it's very, very limited where you can make ice wine.
That is so incredible. I appreciate you sharing that insights, the specifics of how it's made, and why that quality standard is so necessary. So, from a winemaker's perspective, could you describe us how that magic happens after the grape is being frozen, and you said -8 degrees, and what leads to that unique flavor of that. And I do remember from our previous conversation you said that you were not able to get that actual taste right away. It took a couple of attempts, couple of years, to come to that perfect blend. So could you give us that backstory, please?
Sure. Well, the process itself, I'll walk you through just so that people understand, especially people that aren't familiar with, even winemaking. But the normal harvest for grapes in the Northern Hemisphere starts, well, it'll start very shortly. We're, midway through August this year because of these climate change situations. It varies dramatically. But let's say that we start the harvest 1st of September for regular grapes. And I would say basically wrapping up end of October, November. Then we leave the grape, in this case Vidal, which is one of the hybrids, or Riesling, which is the Vitis vinifera, and the traditional variety from Germany. We leave them on the vine, and then we wait for the frost to remove the leaves, just like the leaves on any plant. When they drop off, we put netting over top of the vine, and the leaves drop to the ground. We close the netting, and the netting is there to keep the birds away. Because our first experience, as we all learn things when we start something new, was that when we didn't cover them the first year in 1983, when Kaiser asked me to leave some grapes on the vine, he came back from a conference on December the 3rd of that year, and he started yelling at me when he came in the office. I said, Carl, I didn't pick the grapes. He said, you picked the grapes, they're all gone. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't pick the grapes. I thought you did. We'd had half a meter of snow the night before. These birds had nothing to eat because the seeds were all covered. So they devoured all 13 rows of the grapes. So that's the first thing we do now is we put the netting on the vine, then we close it, and then we literally sit and wait patiently because we have to go through good part of November, December, and then we keep our fingers crossed that we get an early freeze. And that's been so dramatically shifting, particularly with the whole climatic change that's going on, so that we have had situations where we've even picked in March. By that time, there's nothing left of the Riesling because it's very delicate, breaks down. Vidal, which is a very hardy, thick-skinned variety with great aromatics, it lasts a little longer. So last year, for example, we picked on February the 2nd. So the crop was dramatically reduced because you get drying, and when it gets warm, you can actually see the juice, these crystal droplets that look like gold, and they feel like gold to me because that's the profit, dropping on the ground. So it's a very, very high risk business, and that's the reason why it's so expensive. The other aspect is that when it's frozen, if you think of a berry, a grape berry, like any fruit, about 90% of that fruit is water. So when you freeze the grape, 90% of the water is frozen, and what's left in the 10% is the aromatics, the acidity, and the actual
All right.
of the normal yield,
Mm-hmm.
and then very high risk. Then we take the grapes from the field, bring them right to the winery. Some cases we actually bring these presses or the torquio that you saw in the medallion. We actually give it to the farmer, let them press the juice so it's fresh in the field, and they bring it in a container to the winery where we start the fermentation process.
This is pretty cool. I like the fact that you had to encounter a lot of problem in the beginning just to find that exact blend. Could you help us understand why the ice wine bottles are so different in comparison to the regular wines? Because it's a very unique shave, and one of your videos I watched, you said this is actually an olive oil bottle which you're using. Is there a reason behind that?
Well, what happened was the initial bottle that we used was a beer bottle, and it was a short, stubby, brown, about, about 2/3 of the size of this one. And when I show in Italy, I have bottles and glassware, and I looked at it and it said 375 mil, which is the same size as a little stubby beer bottle, which was brown, so you couldn't see anything. Whereas this beautiful bottle, you can not only see the wine, but it's so much taller with the same content. So from a marketing point of view, if you put the two beside each other, this one looks like you're getting much better value. Important part or the key dimension. In the beer bottle, or even if I can show you this, which is my Prosecco bottle, you see how it's flared along here? It flares up. Well, the beer bottle used to do that, and because the sugar in there in the ice wine is in the range of 250 grams per liter, which is probably 20 times, 30 times more than in normal wine, the capillary action, which if you remember from studying in high school, the sugar would migrate up, it would go up and then come out of the cork, and the cork would start to get moldy. So this seals it perfectly because it's perfectly straight all the way down the length of the cork. A bit technical, but both aspects of it made for a very, very beautiful bottle. And also technologically, it created a closure that was much better. Some of the bottles that we had, like the 89 ice wine that won the award in Vinexpo, which is now, if you can get some, it's expensive. But that may be a problem. You should check the cork. If you have an issue, let us know, because we might be able, if it was stored properly, to recork it and then keep what's in the bottle, because it's a very, very expensive bottle, which is what gave us all of the notoriety around the world, winning that Grand Prix de Neuf.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is something very spectacular and amazing which you did. Now, I'm just wondering, the process itself of making ice wine is so treacherous and so much work is involved. It's not easy. So, what motivated you to continue focusing on the ice wine, and how did it contribute in reshaping the perception of Canadian wines in general?
Well, it probably started with a young man named Franck Pironnet, who was running my import division at Inniskillin. And Franck kept going back to France. He was from Poitiers, just outside of Bordeaux. And he kept coming back saying, Donald, these people go crazy in France. They've never seen anything like this other than the great Sauternes. But because we have such high acidity, it really has another dimension of high acidity, which cleanses your palate. And how I say, my mentor, or the great Count Lour Alexander Solus, who unfortunately just passed away very, very recently, was the owner of Chateau de Kiem, the greatest dessert wine in the world. I mean, if you get your hands on a bottle and it's even a recent vintage, is going to cost you thousands of dollars. That distinction of the acidity with the sweetness creates this beautiful equilibrium, so that you taste sweetness when you first put it in your mouth, and then the acidity, which cleanses your palate, prepares your palate for the opportunity to accompany it with food. So when Franck kept telling me about this, he said, we really should take this to Vinexpo and enter it into the competition. So in '89, we actually did an exhibition in the booth and poured it. And then a gentleman named Jacques Puiset, who was one of the great Bordeaux professors in Bordeaux, the guru of wine, of course, in Bordeaux, France, and a friend of mine, John Nadeau, who owned the wine establishment in Toronto, presented it to him. And he said, oh my God, he said, this is amazing. Vidal grapes. He said, these are hybrids, which are, technically considered second class to the Europeans versus the Vitis vinifera, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Riesling. And he said, I know Vidal, the guy that crossed this, my friend. So he made a little bit of noise. We entered the competition in '91. So between that and winning this award, and I made sure that the whole world heard about the award, and who really locked into it was the Japanese consumer, because they thought Canada, cold, ice hockey, Wayne Gretzky, skiing, and Canada and ice wine makes sense. So that's the award there that we won in France, being presented to me by the chairman of the competition. And that really exploded the whole thing. Then we got into this whole phenomena of the Japanese market. And I literally jumped in a plane, because they had been visiting us from Niagara Falls. They'd come with a busload of tour guides, and they always locked in on the ice wine. So I went over and I literally became almost part Japanese. I spent a lot of time there. And that's another lesson I learned. When you're marketing something, focus on your market. Pick one or two or three, and then stay very, very focused, because there's a lot of other competition that'll be right there behind you. So we picked Japan to start. It was a huge success. They gift a lot. So when they came to Canada, they would buy the ice wine as a gift when they returned home. Then we got into duty free with our very, very successful partnership with LVMH, which owns DFS. Bernard Arnault, who is now the richest guy in the world, even better than Musk and Buffett. And what's amazing about it is there's an individual who works in the luxury field, very, very successful. And when the 2008 crash happened, he did something that I followed very closely because it was a good example. Never lower your prices to move inventory. The world shut down in 2008. He didn't lower his prices. We didn't lower. We lost an amazing number of sales because people went down market, bought cheaper. But when the market came back, that's when we maintained our prices and maintained the profitability. So the short-term gain is not a good idea. Always think long-term. In the wine business, we have to think that way. We plant a vineyard, takes 4 years before it crops. Then you make a red wine, takes 2 years, barrique aging. It's a very complicated, very intense investment, but we always play the long-term game because, and then you have to age the wine. If you want to age a wine, I mean, right now, I think if I could stand to be corrected, but I believe that wine has been the most successful investment in the last 20 years. Even Bitcoin, which went crazy and then collapsed. Wine as an investment. And then if you, are tired of it sitting in your basement, you can drink it, which is a bonus.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. Now, I was just wondering, and I appreciate you sharing, all those interesting aspects about how you came, making this happen, the award which you won, and how you shaped the whole industry as a whole. My next question, which I have for you, Mrs. Ziraldo, is that industry is evolving significantly over these years. What are some of the exciting trends you have observed personally, and how have consumer preferences? Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Someone just came in. I'm going to introduce you to someone if I can take 1 minute, because this is the other important
Yeah,
thing to do
absolutely.
in any business. Hire people that are smarter than you. And
Okay.
my public relations director just walked in, and I'd like you to say hello, because individuals like Carl making these great ice wines, the Genius Wine ice wine, and I'm going to introduce you to Debbie Pratt, who really made everybody famous at Inniskilling, including the brand, myself, and Kaiser. That's her peeking here. Come on up, Deb.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you,
Well,
Debbie?
good. I can't believe I'm talking to India. Well,
This is Jason.
Jason,
Yeah.
very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. And I
Covered,
uh-huh.
I was saying we've covered a lot of topics. One of the things that Deborah can share with you is one of the things that we've worked a lot with is a partnership I mentioned to LVMH DFS down here with the theater in Niagara Falls, 13 million visitors. And it's become a great tourist area. And we've been working on creating a very great tourist destination in the Niagara region. And we've got all kinds of things here, which, is for another time. But Debbie could share with you some of the marketing aspects that we worked on so diligently to get the global recognition that we received.
Well, it's interesting, Jason, because Donald mentioned partners and excellence, and our one of our mottos was, or slogans, whatever you want to call it, was partners and excellence. So we knew we could produce excellent wine, but we needed to then look at other people that we could partner with that would extend that feeling and understanding of excellence, which was Riedel Glassware, which I'm not sure if you talked about Riedel, but working with sommeliers and chefs and people who were integral in profiling quality wines. You had to have quality food, and all the local food movement, which really advanced into our tourism aspect. And again, it's just like the agritourism that everybody knows from Italy, as an example. We're building that here in Niagara-on-the-Lake, so it's very important. I just came from the dentist, so if I look like I've got a crooked smile, I just come. Sorry, yeah.
You look awesome. You look awesome, and I appreciate what you're doing there. And one thing which I really like, what Mrs. Ziraldo said, is having the right team members. In fact, talented ones who are even better than you. That really shapes an organization. So Debbie, your contribution has been amazing. How does it feel to be a part of this industry? Like, you have spent so many years, you have done so many things. what do you feel at this moment of time? Like, can you do more? Is there anything left you feel you can accomplish, contribute anything different, or do something more, helping people out? What can else be done? Like, you guys have accomplished so much. What more can be done?
It's continued education of what has been done and what can be done, but you have to build it on a base. So I was a teacher and I taught primary. And when you teach children to read and write, you're forming the basics. So what Donald and Carl and I did was we were educating people as Carl produced his premium wines and Donald with his Ziraldo wines as well, is that we had to educate people in what we could grow here, why we could grow it, being on the 43rd latitude, and that we were in the same position or more southerly than the vineyards of Burgundy and Bordeaux, and giving people an awareness of why we could do what we could do, because you can't just say, drink this Canadian wine if you can't back it up with the understanding. So everything that I believe the marketing was based upon was education and educating our consumer, and then they would come back to learn more. And as they learned, they stopped being prejudiced, because our problem in the beginning was um, Canadian wine didn't have any international standing, and look where we are now. We have an international reputation and standing, but it was because we had to do a lot of blind tastings where people tried our wines and didn't against Italian, French, whatever. And as long as they weren't being prejudiced about where it came from, we always did extremely well. So it was just educating what grapes we can grow, why we can grow them, and what we're best at, which is cool climate viticulture and, of course, ice wine.
Jason, you mentioned earlier that you tried to find my Ziraldo ice wine in India, and I did arrive there before COVID. My distributor disappeared during COVID, and you also mentioned that a lot of people weren't aware. So Debbie's point is very valid. So we've got a lot of work still to do, not just to illustrate that we can grow grapes here, but also to get it in people's mouth for them to taste it. Because once you taste the ice wine, there's no discussion. It's spectacular. It's an experience. And that's the kind of thing that we need to get information. One of the issues, as I mentioned to you in India, is the very high tax, which makes it quite prohibitive to buy a bottle of ice wine. But, we like to go into new markets. And certainly India is one of those. You got an amazing population there. And I also understand that you're doing a lot of work in the sparkling wine sector. So there seems to be an interest in wine, and we'd like to be part of that as we grow internationally.
Absolutely, absolutely. We will figure that out. Now, something which Debbie said, and I would like to ask you both this question. It's about climate change. How has climate change impacted vineyards and wine production? And what steps can the industry take to adapt to these challenges while maintaining wine quality?
Jason, that would take an entire program. And we hosted a international cool climate conference. And Miguel Torres from Torres Wines in Spain, he spoke at the conference and he gave a 1-hour presentation. Everybody is suffering. And I'm glad you used the word climate change, because global warming is a problem in the summer, but climate change can be devastating. We've had a lot of rain here. I just had my cousin here from Italy. They had hailstorms the size of golf balls that just destroyed the vineyards. And there's too much rain. There's flooding in many parts of the world. British Columbia's got forest fires, Australia. So this whole climate change is impacting the industry. The smoke, believe it or not, from the forest fires is in some cases becoming a taint in the wine. So there's a number of factors mitigating it. There's a long list of things to mitigate. Basically, we're farmers. We adapt, and we're going to have to adapt to this as well. In the case of red grapes, it's to our advantage that it gets warmer because it's cool here, and we have difficulty ripening the red grapes completely because the temperature drops off dramatically, which is good for ice wine, but the grapes don't get a chance to mature. But then in the wintertime, we're actually getting a little concerned because we're getting such dramatic changes that in February, we're going to get some warm weather. The plant starts to move, and then it gets shocked again by the cold. So it's a very, very complicated issue, not just for us, for anybody who owns a home or is in low-lying regions around the world. Some islands are disappearing. So we just have to learn to adapt, and everybody will do what they can. And as farmers, that's part of being a farmer. Mother Nature, as I said, I put her on that label for a reason. She dictates what happens in the field, and what happens in the field is what translates into a good wine.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have a few people commenting over LinkedIn. Some of them said, "Good day to both of you." My close friend from from Pennsylvania, she said hello. Her name is Leslie. Another good friend of mine, she said, "Love the label of the icewine," which we are looking at. Okay, another comment which says Captain Ziraldo from Patrick over LinkedIn. Another LinkedIn user said market insight is the key. And one LinkedIn user said specifically for Debbie, Debbie is a true leader in tourism and the industry. So shout out to you, Debbie. Thank you so much for that.
Jason, can
Now,
I give a shout
yeah.
out? I saw Walter Senzik posted a hello. Walter's started a magazine here. He then became mayor of St. Catharines, and now he's got a TV show. A radio show. And he gave me the opportunity to talk about something near and dear to my heart, which doesn't relate to the wine market in a direct sense, but it's about the Greenbelt and preserving the fruit lands here in Niagara, which unfortunately are also a nice place to live, and we're giving up too much acreage to housing. We want to basically save the very limited amount of land we have below the escarpment so that we can continue to expand our market, which is still very small. And if we made it 3 times the size, we'd need every square inch and acre of land that we have here in the peninsula.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you bought the Greenbelt project, as a part of this discussion, because I went through your pitch deck, which you had shared with me initially, and I was reading through it. I'm just going to do a screen share. So as you can see, so this proposed future Greenbelt expansion, where you have suggested, would you mind sharing a little more detail as to why did you propose this and how it's going to help the environment overall, how it's going to help Canada overall and the wine industry overall?
Well, I think the Greenbelt is self-explanatory. I mean, we need to maintain not only for agriculture and farming, but for biodiversity, for watershed that feeds the cities. And Toronto has become one of the fastest growing cities in North America. And we just got to be very careful not to infringe on the agricultural lands, which happens to be in the same southern part of Canada around the Great Lakes, which the climate moderates, and it's important. The 1.4 million acres, which was the Niagara Peninsula where we are, was bookended by the extreme other end in the Rouge River Valley. It's called. It's an agricultural preserve out in the far east side that you see on that green map. That was instituted about 15 years ago. But the pressure now with Toronto and Canada growing so rapidly, we are a great welcomer of immigrants. We've brought in 500,000 immigrants, I think, this year. But we are very, very concerned about the Greenbelt. And I'm particularly concerned about preserving the fruit belts in Niagara, where it's very, very restricted as far as growing. Once you go above that escarpment that I mentioned, which is where Niagara Falls is, you can't grow these very delicate Vitis vinifera. So that's really the fundamental issue, is that we want to maintain those lands. We're not blessed like France, Italy, Australia, California, where they can, spread out all over the place. We have the Okanagan Valley, and then a couple limited areas here in Niagara being 90% of Canada's production. We got Prince Edward County in the east side, and then southwestern Ontario. So it's very limited. I'd say about 10,000 acres of vinifera, 6,000 of hybrid. And if we were to triple that, we'd start bumping up against the restriction and housing and highways and so on. So it's very, very important to us to maintain that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So some comment from somebody named Murray Simpson. Great interview. Donald was listening to on LinkedIn, but I think he found the YouTube version also. Leslie said, fascinating and interesting history. Thank you so much for the comments. So my next question, and I appreciate you sharing about the Greenbelt project, because I think it's quite important. And I think I can't imagine, like, what made you send that letter to, Mr. Harris. I think that was his name was. You were able to send this letter and propose the expansion project. Like, typically, we shy away from doing certain things, but what made you, act and send that, do that bold move and send that letter out, and they acknowledging, the government of Canada, acknowledging it and helping you with that direction. So what was running in your head, like,
Well, let me tell you that we Canadians are very shy. Everybody thinks we're really nice and shy and so on. The fact is that I was in California because we were buying a vineyard. We bought a vineyard, Inniskillinwines Napa, which was branded Terra. And I'd love to show you the branding because I know you're into branding. I'll show you that some other time. And when I was down there, Napa Valley was celebrating its 30th anniversary of the Napa Agricultural Preserve. And everybody knows Napa now. It's become a world-renowned wine region, particularly after the 1976 Jugement de Paris, where Stephen Spurrier did a tasting in France, and California all of a sudden went through the ceiling and everybody recognized it. So I brought that idea back and called the Premier Harris, who was the Premier of the province of Ontario, and he and a gentleman named David Lindsay jumped on it and said, that's a great idea, let's do it. They responded to my letter. Well, they said, write a letter, make it official. So I wrote the letter, and unfortunately, when the Greenbelt was created, everybody got so focused on the Greenbelt, which is a good thing, and it went through, and my hat's off to Premier McGuinty, who then became Premier. But for some reason, the highway got left out, and that's unfortunately now become a problem because if you try to travel from Toronto to Niagara, there are a lot of people. They're all coming down to see the falls. They're coming down to visit wineries. They're coming down to experience the local food experience. And it's now a congested 4-hour drive, which used to take an hour and a half. So that prompted me to, initiate it. And now I'm back on the wagon again, because as this pressure starts to build, I'm creating a solution. I hate when people complain and don't provide a solution. So this is a solution to a problem. And even if we start today doing an environmental assessment and then building it, it's going to take 20 years. And, I'm having a bit of fun with it because we could electrify it. So you could leave Toronto and every 500 meters, there's a charging station, which is remote. And as you get to Detroit, Windsor, which is about, 1,500 kilometers, 600 kilometers.
Yeah.
It's a long way. Your car will be fully charged when you get to the end of it. So, and then to put a rail down the middle, I mean, I'm sure you in India with 1.4 billion people have to manage transporting them. We only have 40 million, and they're all stuck down by the Great Lakes, which is a great place to be. But so that's where it initiated. And it was like many of the other things that we did, whether it's icewine, whether it's table wines. We are not afraid to ask questions, and we're not afraid to ask dumb questions to people who have had the same problems that we had, or basically just, how do you make wine? And one of the great things, your title is The Secrets of Winemaking. I can tell you there are no secrets in winemaking. They've been making wine since the Greeks, the Romans, and there are no secrets. It's just like a chef. A lot of people can take fruits and vegetables and some meat and turn it into a food. Great chefs turn it into an experience. And that's very much our case. We just like to look at places that have experienced certain things. In this case, it's how to preserve farmland and, still maintain the transportation. Can't stop housing. We're going to provide housing for people coming to this country. And hopefully everybody will have the same opportunity we have. But, we have to preserve this farmland, because once it's gone, it's going to be irreplaceable.
I think, Jeff, I might just jump in. The other slogan that's very appropriate here that Inniskillin has abided by from the beginning is not so much bound by tradition as inspired by it. And so learning from those who've come before us and the wisdom that they have given to why they are still in business and why they're still, being fruitful with the wine industry and the agricultural industry. So it's paying attention to what others have done and building from that. And unfortunately, some people aren't paying as close attention as they should.
And we won't name names.
I appreciate you guys sharing that. That was very, very insightful. Mrs. Ziraldo, I want to ask you a personal question. The question is that, after, Carl passing away, is there a reason why you decided to like start your own thing? You could have just, got inskilling up and maybe, involved with the same brand and made that up. I'm just wondering what made you start your own thing. It's not a bad thing, don't take me wrong. It's definitely a good thing because you expanded so much from there.
Sure.
But I just wanted to understand what was happening in your mind during that time.
I'll try and simplify it as best I can. When free trade came to Canada, it opened up the market to the US particularly and to the European wines. So we were barraged by competition. We didn't do well with the free trade agreement because the government felt the beer industry was bigger, more tax revenue, so they protected it. They left the wine industry basically to its own situation. So we thought, let's combine a lot of the wineries, and we merged 3 or 4 local wineries, big ones, small ones, some who had retail exposure. So it became very important. So we merged all them together. And then I guess we're having so much fun, we decided to go and buy other vineyards around the world. We bought Kim Crawford in New Zealand. We bought Goundry in Australia, Hogue in Washington State in the United States. We bought R.H. Phillips in California. We ended up with 14 wineries, and then we went public as a public company. So another lesson to be learned, when you get that big, and if you make a slight mistake, which we seem to have because I think we had bought 13 or 14 wineries, we went and bought a big distribution company. The stock declined, and a large U.S. company jumped in and took us over. So I stuck around for a while, and I guess I'm not the kind of guy to work in a big corporation, even though we created a pretty big one ourselves here called Vincor, and we had opened up, wineries like Jackson Triggs. What's Harry McWater's? Out in British Columbia, because we had wineries out there in British Columbia, including
Sumac Ridge.
Sumac Ridge. And we had Inniskillin, Okanagan, which was a joint venture between the indigenous people from the Inkimi tribe. So we got pretty big, but we got taken out in a hostile takeover. And so I decided I'm just going to move on and went and planted a vineyard. And I thought, I'm just going to grow grapes and maybe give away a little wine to my friends. And then it got too complicated. So I thought, I'm going to bottle it. And then I had some fun with the label, as you saw. And then I started selling it. And all of the people who we used to deal with internationally would say, can I have it? Can I have it? So now I've got a nice global distribution of Ziraldo ice wine. And also it's very much to do with that 10-year-old that I mentioned, my son Aspen, who, maybe someday instead of being a chef, which he thinks he can cook, or a ski bum like his dad, he may want to, grow grapes. If he doesn't, he'll choose to do what he wishes to do. But this way he'll have a platform, and it'll be a legacy to think about.
I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, at one point of time, I think that's going to definitely happen because I am very fascinated with the wine industry. Okay, personally, I have never been to a winery or done, but just the whole thing, the whole vibe, the whole process. And by watching some of your videos, when you were showing us around the winery, it was pretty amazing. So I appreciate and applaud you for what you have done. I have a next question. My next question is about the concept of terroir. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Could you shed light to my listeners, help us understand what is the concept of terroir? Because I think it has a couple of components like climate, soil, topography, geology, microclimate, flora, fauna. Could you help us understand this?
It's a very complicated word. It doesn't have an English translation. For that matter, it doesn't have one in Italian either. It's very much a French creation. And it really encompasses all of the things that you just mentioned. Probably the most significant, of course, is the latitude that you're located in. First of all, you have to be within a certain range in the Northern Hemisphere and in the Southern Hemisphere. And if you draw a line across, you'll hit the wine regions in South America, Argentina, and Chile. Then you go all the way across to Australia, New Zealand. Then if you go up into the Northern Hemisphere, you've got Europe. And in North America, you've got California, Oregon, and then in the East Coast where we are. So that is one aspect of it. The soil itself, the nature of the soil. I'll take an example in France, Chablis. Chablis is a very rich chalk soil, limestone. And you can taste that in the flintiness and the minerality that you get in the wine. If you have a clay soil, which is much harder to grow plants in of any type, but you get very high sugars. Then you've got rocky soils that have good drainage, like in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And that situation is very much a concern for the water, because the plant has to go way down through the rocks to get the water, but the heat from the reflection off the rocks becomes part of the quote terroir. So it's all of those things. Even the slope that the vineyard's on. If you look in Burgundy, the Burgundy Hill faces a particular way. And talking about climate change, what's happened now is some of the south-facing slopes that used to be prime for viticulture, now because of the heat and the sun, are starting to become a negative. And so people are starting to shift their thinking about this southern exposure, so they have to shift a little bit, very minor. But those are the many things that contribute to the terroir. And then the final element, which is probably an add-on, a clip-on, is the winemaker, the art form of making wine. Because just as the chef adds his personality to the food he creates, so does the winemaker. And there's very much a signature based on terroir. In Europe, where the tradition is very much where the wine began, that's very much based on the terroir, the soil, where it comes from, referred to as an appellation, which is governed by very strict rules. In North America, it's more of a celebrity type thing. As Hollywood created celebrity, so the chefs now and winemakers have become celebrities, and it's more about them than it is about the terroir. It just because we don't have the tradition. If you think about Europe, the Romans went up all through Europe and they planted vines everywhere. And as the wines evolved, Burgundy was Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Champagne was Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Bordeaux was Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And as you move around, the Loire is Cabernet Franc. So each one of those becomes an identity because of the terroir. But North America is very strongly focused on the winemaker, as they are with celebrity chefs, which you see very prominently featured on all of our stations. And a little something that I'm playing with right now. I have a colleague from Niagara, Giovanni Petrella, and we're actually trying to create a TV wine series to do exactly what Debbie was referring to about education, because we'll go right into the wineries. We'll see the great wine producers like Marchese Pieri Antinori from Tuscany. We'll see Angelo Gaia from Piemonte, Jean-Charles Poisset. I noticed you just put up a picture of Jean-Charles and Giovanni and myself and Gina Gallo, his wife, that one right there. The guy in the middle with the hat on, I think you recognize him. And Jean-Charles is in the white jacket. Gina is between myself and John. And we're actually hoping to put this thing together very much to educate the general public. And, this gives me a great opportunity to speak to a vast audience and are being able to educate people about the benefits. And, there's so many health benefits of wine too. You've all heard the story about resveratrol, which is very much connected to the Mediterranean diet, and why people in Europe don't seem to have as many health problems, because they drink wine in moderation. That's very fundamental, that you don't, alcohol, like anything else, can be dangerous. But I always make the illustration that water, which we can't live without, but if you get it up over above here, you won't last very long because it's dangerous as well. So we are very, very keen on maintaining this educational aspect, and the more we get an opportunity to do it. I've written a book on ice wine. The first one was called Anatomy of a Winery, just to talk about our region, which there wasn't much written about. And I can share with the listeners, actually, of course, Debbie happens to have one right here. I don't know if you can see that, ice wine. And inside is the entire story. And if you go on my website, www.ziraldo.ca, and you go under book and you scroll down to electronic version, there's a little box in there that says discount. If you type in the word Vidal, like the wine Vidal, which is, right, I don't know if you can see that, Vidal, and type Vidal in the discount box, you will receive a complimentary copy electronically of my book and to your viewers for free. Otherwise, you're going to pay $50 if you go to the liquor store. To the
All right, I have it on the screen. Is it spelled correctly? Vidal?
Vidals. That's the grape variety that is a hybrid that we use and has become very, very popular because Riesling is the more traditional cepage from Germany. And it's very delicate, very soft, very easy drinking. And the Vidal has thick skin, so it tends to create more viscosity. So the actual product is much more viscous. It has unbelievable aromatics, mango, lychee, and kind of tropical fruit. So it tends to be much more attractive to the new wine enthusiast, whereas the Riesling is much more sophisticated. The sommeliers like it very delicate, more aromas of pear and peach.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I think I did watch one of your other videos and I was able to get a copy for myself. I am in the process of reading it. I haven't received the time to read the whole thing, but I would be reading it. I am positive it is very, very informative. So, guys, if you're watching this, go to www.ziraldo.ca, go under the book section, purchase the electronic book, use the code VIDAL. Okay, and use it under the discount section. So $20 off. You should be able to get that ebook. You should get a PDF, and you should be able to download it and go through it hassle free. It's
Jason,
pretty interesting. I appreciate.
Okay, so one of the things that you'll find in the book, of course, in Italy, where I come from, wine is part of the culture. Wine and food is synonymous. We don't think of it as anything else but part of a meal. So I had our resident chef, Isabella, do a number of ice wine pairings. And generally people think of ice wine and dessert wines.
All right, so we just lost connection. I'm just waiting for Mr. Ziraldo to join the conversation back. So people who are listening, I saw a comment on LinkedIn, I guess. He wants a copy of the book. All right, so I think he's back. All right, you're back.
Somebody phones and cuts me off. So I'll just give you a quick view of some of the pictures. You'll find them in the book. So Isabella, who is our resident chef at Inniskillin, we decided to put that in because it would also attract people who love cooking. And there's everything. This is dessert, but there are others that are playing with complements. My favorite is, where to go? That's foie gras. And there's one in here, French toast. Instead of pouring maple syrup over it, you pour ice wine. It's much more tasty than maple syrup, which is another very Canadian. Where to go? It's in here. There we go. That's the Canadian version of French toast. I guess we call it Canadian toast.
I also remember watching a video wherein you use the ice wine to make butter, and you have it.
Yeah, we don't do butter. We leave that to the cattle farmers. But everybody's now making. There's chocolates. There's one of the things that we did create because you can appreciate in India. I can't imagine what a restaurant would charge for a bottle of ice wine, but it gets into the hundreds of dollars. And after you had a meal, having a bottle, so we created an ice wine martini. And basically it's 2 parts vodka and 1 part ice wine. And I always say shaken, not stirred, to repeat somebody else's idea. And then instead of garnishing it with an olive, you garnish it with a frozen grape. Just throw the grapes in the freezer and then throw 1 or 2 into the martini glass and you've got another Canadian experience. Or the newest one that I just created, I mentioned to you that because of my heritage, I have Ziraldo Prosecco that comes from the vineyards in Valdobbiadene in Italy. So one day we were at an event and somebody said, we need a signature cocktail. And I said, well, let me think about it. So I came up with the idea of taking the ice wine and combining it with the Prosecco. And so we now have a Aperol Spritz a la Canadiana, which would be, I guess, a ice wine spritz with Prosecco.
That is really interesting. Now, I wanted to ask you about Equifera. I think I watched a couple of videos on that. But when I tried looking this up online, I don't know if it's a geographical limitation, but I was not able to find the website or any products related to Equifera. Does that still exist?
No,
Or is that something? No.
no,
Okay.
it came and went because a colleague of mine who bought a vineyard in Niagara asked if I could do that ice wine for him. And he did it for about 3 or 4 years, and then he just decided that he'd given most of it away instead of selling it, which is he could afford to do so. And so we discontinued it. So it was just a flash in the pan.
All right, all right. So my next question is about technology, and as it's advancing on a daily basis, how do you envision the future of winemaking? And is there any technological advancements that you believe will further revolutionize the wine industry?
Probably the best example I could give you is labor, as is the case everywhere, especially after COVID. It seems it's impossible to get people. I hear the restaurant industry telling me that, they got to find robots to do the wait staff because it's very difficult to get people to work in restaurants. In our case, hand-picking ice wine, if you can think about -8 Celsius at night, because the reason we do it at night, the sun's not shining, so the birds are asleep. And if you think about that sunshine hitting, well, if you're standing outside and you're in the shade, it's a completely different experience than if you're standing outside and the sun's hitting you. If that grape berry is sitting in the sun, it can have a 5-degree variability up to 10. So it can destroy the opportunity to pick at -8. It can jump up to -3, 4, and you can't do it. So we pick at night, very cold, and trying to get people to come out at 11 o'clock at night to pick ice wine all night. So we tried to adapt the machines. Not an easy task because think about these berries, they're frozen. As soon as you shake the vine, they all fall on the ground. So we had to come up with all kinds of technology and vibrators and specific vibrations that would only shake right above where the catch basins are. So it took 5, 6 years to do that. The other that is becoming predominant in the world is refrigeration to control the temperature during fermentation. Because if it gets too warm, as happens in many regions, especially warm countries, even here, you need to control that fermentation, otherwise it gets away on you. So there are a number of technologies. Needless to say, all of the technology that goes into, quote, processing, which, computers control pretty much everything. Even in the vineyard, we now have frost machines. They're big wind machines. They look like windmills, and they assist us in the wine regions with frost protection, but even in the winter to help move the temperature to keep the air moving so that you don't get as much damage from the cold. Those are all controlled by computer, and they will read the temperature and they'll turn on only when necessary because they sound like helicopters. And if you live near one, it can be a bit disturbing in your sleep. So all of those technologies, measuring the moisture in the soil, so that in order to preserve water, we only irrigate drip irrigation, not overhead because that's a waste of water, but you drip irrigate to each individual plant. It's calibrated and you only feed the plant where it's needed. So on the top of a hill, it'll dry out sooner, and then you irrigate there, down at the base, less. So all of those technologies are being incorporated. And the other one that we're working on, we still haven't figured out, is how to keep the damn birds out of our vineyard. And the Italians use them as a meal, but to be nice to the birds. The netting works, but it's extremely expensive. So we're trying to come up with technologies that can assist us to move the birds away from the vineyard, especially as they get ripe. And you can imagine these nice, fat, juicy ice wine grapes when the ground is completely covered in snow. There's no berries or anything to eat, and these birds are flying along and they see these berries. They can wipe out a vineyard in a matter of hours.
Thank you so much for sharing the technological advancements which you are making. And I see it. I have seen many of your videos with big tractors and big machinery extracting the grapes from the vineyards. So it's pretty cool. And I appreciate you sharing all those insights. Now, I think it's time to have a little fun because we've been speaking business quite a lot. Now, I want to see humanistic side of you, the fun side of Mr. Ziraldo. So I'm going to ask you some funny questions, okay? And okay,
We should have a glass of wine. To be
hear me
funny,
out
Chris,
and
huh?
and let me know what you feel. First, let's have a glass of wine then. In that case, but why don't you have a glass of wine and let's start.
Okay.
So the question which I wanted to ask you, do you want me to wait for a second so that you can
No, it's okay.
get a glass and have
Fortunately, Debbie,
a sip of wine?
Debbie came in. Probably the wine would help her toothache, I would imagine, after the drilling. But please go ahead. Go
All
ahead.
right. All right. So my first question, and it's a funny question. So, Mrs. Ziraldo, they say that wine gets better with age. You also said it in this video. Okay. Do you think that applies to us as well, or should we stick to a cellar?
No, I mean, you're talking about us personally becoming wiser with
Yeah,
age.
us as human beings. Yeah.
Well, it used to be very much the case, but these days with these young entrepreneurs, it seems that these young people are sort of taking away that advantage we have. But listen, one of my objectives right now is, yes, I've got involved in a number of things, but I love mentoring young people so that I can share my experiences that sometimes cost me money, cost me a lot of time as we researched and got more and more knowledge about these things. And the other thing is traveling, right? It gave me the pleasure to travel around the world and visit with the great wine producers like Robert Mondavi in California, Count Louis Salus, who I mentioned, and, RIP to Count Louis Salus, who just passed away. But all of these great people, all their wisdom, I think as you get older, that wisdom is not only beneficial, but it's extremely important to pass that on to younger people. So I do a lot of mentoring if I can, and that's important to me. And like Debbie said, it's really education, and it saves people a lot of heartaches, especially in the wine business, because there's a statement in the wine business that says if you want to make a small fortune in the wine business, start with a big one.
That's a really nice quote. I appreciate you sharing that. The next thing which I wanted to ask you was, what's the most unusual or bizarre talent you have which nobody knows about?
I missed the most bizarre what?
Okay, what is the most unusual or bizarre talent you have that nobody knows about?
Wow, that's a good one. On skis or in business?
Anything, like
Anything.
anything which people are not aware of.
What am I not aware of? Boy, that's a good one. I think you might have to ask Debbie that instead of me. I'm trying to think of what's a bizarre talent that I have. I don't know, reading people, maybe but I don't talk to people very much. I listen because when you listen, you learn a lot more about people than talking. Because when you talk, you give away too much, especially when you're negotiating a deal. So maybe that, but then I can't tell you that because everybody's going to know that and they'll they have me out.
I have to say, my answer to that question, having worked with Donald for 35 years, is his ability to be a visionary. And I don't use that word loosely. We would have discussions about something and he'd say, Debbie, you're thinking too short term. You have to think long term. And so if you think about all the things that Donald has done with Inniskillin and with VQA, starting VQA and tourism and the agricultural preserve, all of that, the green belt, he has a very strong ability to look far enough ahead where some people are way too short-term thinking. So I think that's a skill that Donald has that I observed time after time. And it would come to fruition and I'd say, yep, you were right. But he was patient and I was maybe not as patient at times. And it always came that his patience with listening and his patience with what's going to happen in the future, what could happen, and how do you build it. He was always looking at building bases that would build that vision to come true.
Yeah, of course.
I see that you have poured your glass of wine, so I think
So I poured one for you, but I'll let Debbie experience it. So this is my prosecco from Valdobbiadene in Italy, north. It's between Venice and Verona, and it's a UNESCO heritage. If you have an opportunity to visit, it's quite spectacular there at the base of the mountains of the hills in northern Italy. And I'm going to have a sip of this, but then I'm going to actually create this cocktail that I told you about by opening the ice wine. Oh yeah, here.
2 shots of uh-huh.
And
The vodka one, right? The vodka martini one, I
no,
think.
this isn't vodka martini. That's ice wine and vodka. This one
Okay.
is because it's my prosecco and my ice wine. And
Ah.
Debbie just brought this glass, which is another partnership we did. George Riedel, who is 10th generation glassblower from Austria, where Carl comes from. We created this glass just for ice wine. It took 16 experts from around the world, met in Toronto. Carl and George Riedel, they sat with 13 different glasses, of which there are different types for different wines. And after 6 hours, like most of the time, people couldn't agree on which wine they liked best or which glass they liked best. So we sent George away with 3 different glasses, one Sauterne, one Burgundy, and one port. And from that, he created this Vinum Extreme, and it's all explained in the book, which much of what I've been talking about is explained in much more detail, and created this. And what Carl said when he tasted the wine, he said, perfect. He said, this is how I expected my wine to taste. And if you want to do an experiment, like we do this, I actually had the opportunity with Michael Mondavi, Robert Mondavi's son, myself and George traveled across Canada, and we tasted out of different glassware, all made by Riedel. And believe it or not, if you take the ice wine and pour it into the Riedel glass, like that, and then you put it into pick any other glass, Waterford Crystal or the Enau glass, which is the international tasting glass, and you pour them in a little bit in each, you would swear they're different wines, because it's all about the delivery to the palate, the shape and the aroma that's released. It's quite extraordinary, actually. So, cheers. There, Deb. Cheers. Cheers, Jason. It's too bad you can't have a bottle. I'm going to
Thank
send
you.
you one.
Terrible.
I'll have a sip of water.
So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create
Uh-huh.
a Thomas
Oh.
cocktail. Yeah, look.
Okay.
Maybe a little more ice wine.
Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge Debbie on what she was saying about you being a visionary, and sometimes, most of the times, a leader has to think way ahead of time just to make sure, and not everybody has that quality. So I appreciate, Debbie, you sharing that, and that's a mark of a true leader, because you really have to think ahead of time just to make sure the effect and impact of our actions today gets sufficed, gets taken care of, and we don't do anything to jeopardize our future
Jason, I
also.
think,
So
I just to reinforce that, I think when you talked about the, where'd the green belt come from, I fell upon an idea in Napa because of the Napa Preserve, and then I brought it back here. And trust me, I've been getting a lot of abuse, because when you say you want to build a highway, these days you don't build highways because the tree huggers are going to get upset. But it's a solution to a problem. And it's land that isn't suitable for much other than soybeans and corn, but we have a vast country that can grow those things. So, you got to stick your neck out, because I know I'm going to get hammered for saying that, because we're going to build a highway to create an alternative route, mostly for trucking. And, that way the tourists have an easier way. Right now, the trucks can't get to Oshawa because of the problem of the highway.
And the
So,
US.
and of course, coming from the US is another issue. So you're right. Being a visionary sometimes sounds very glamorous. Sometimes you just got an idea and it's not what everybody else is thinking. And I advise people, don't stop because one of the advantages of that is, like when we started, Carl and I people kept saying, "Oh, there's two crazy guys down there in the peninsula. They think they're going to grow grapes and make wine to compete with the Europeans." So fortunately, we were young and naive enough that we didn't pay attention. We went ahead and did it anyway, and it turned out. Now, did I have failures? I had two big ones. My nursery business with the family failed because we had a currency exchange problem. We had a refrigeration issue that broke down, and we had to sell land to, we almost went bankrupt. The second one was where I was born. I decided I didn't want to sell the farm because my mom's house was on it where I was born, along with my two brothers. So I subdivided it. And so I was a developer for a while. So I know all about development and the fact that you can make an enormous amount of money. But I basically didn't want to give up that heritage. So, I went into the development business. That went bankrupt because the interest rates in 1981 went to 18%. So, I cleaned it up. I didn't bankrupt it. I just took 8 years to clean it up. And I have to tell you, as many entrepreneurs will tell you, the successful ones always have a failure under their belt because that's where you learn from experience. It's the school of hard knocks. Like if you're successful, and I'm sticking my neck out now. A lot of people in the last, let's say 20 years, the world has been very, very good to us, very successful. The world's a bit upside down these days between COVID, inflation, all of the things, price increases, real estate in Toronto and Vancouver are going crazy. States, I'm sure it's the same. People have not experienced hard times, and be careful because, if you're not prepared, it'll take you out real fast because it's easy, it takes some time to climb up the ladder, but coming down, you come down the speed of gravity. And that's very much the case in business. So any advice that we can share with, younger people, just be aware, be cocky and do what you want to do, but just make sure that you've got I'm not going to call it a safety net, but, and the other thing where the mentors fit in, you really should have a mentor. And as I heard somebody say the other day, if the person is being paid, they're not a mentor. So if you're hiring a consultant, that's not a mentor. A mentor is somebody who wants to share their experiences and pass it on to you so that you can have a better success in business or in your life.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. I appreciate you sharing that. And now I have another question. Okay, now maybe it's already there out there. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm going to ask you this question. If your life were like a wine label, okay, what would it be? Okay, first of all, what year would it be? And what would the tasting notes say?
Well, it'd be a 212 because that was when
2012.
212, and that's because
Okay.
that was when my son was born. So I took particular care, and the only table wine I made under the Ziraldo label was in 212. And it was kind of an accident because in the vineyard that I planted, which was a research vineyard when I was chairman of the Vineland Research and Innovation Center, and I planted it on the original location where we started in Inniskillen in a fruit shack. It was pretty funny. Talk about two guys in a garage. Ours was two guys in a fruit shack. And that vintage was so hot, the grapes started to break down. There's the man. That's my son, Aspen. So I'm going to say by coincidence, the weather turned bad and we were not going to be able to leave the grapes on the vine until December, January. This was November. So I called Carl and I said, Carl, what am I going to do? The grapes are going to be all rotten by the time it's time to pick ice wine. He said, pick it, put it in the cold storage and let all the sediment settle out, then make table wine. So I did, and it was all organic because the research block, which was different clones of Riesling from around the world, and I was pushing organic as something we should move into more and more, less use of pesticides. And there's a real strong movement now to do organic. And it's basically what everybody's grandfather in the wine industry used to do before First and Second World War. There were no pesticides or herbicides. So it's all going back to nature and finding natural ways to produce the wine. Not easy. It's very expensive to do it that way. So that year I did a 212 ice wine. And I guess I only had one bottle recently because there's not much of it laying around anymore. So that's a good one for you. It's very unique. It's a one of a kind, just like my son.
That is super cool, and he looks absolutely stunning. I appreciate you sharing his picture. Okay, so the last thing which I want to ask you, and we would be wrapping our show very soon. If you like my listeners to take one thing away from this whole conversation we had, and we went like A, B, C, D, like we went all the places, we spoke about numerous things. What is that one thing you want to talk to my listeners, tell them about, they can take away from this conversation? What would that be?
I think probably surround yourself with very positive people. And as I said earlier, people that are smarter than you, because the only thing that's going to happen is they make you look good. I mean, Debbie walked in here all of a sudden. Not only did she provide the glassware, all of a sudden she's got the book handing to me. That's the kind of team. I played football, and I know that if you don't have a team that's going to work together, you can't win the game. You got 60 minutes, and the opposition is the enemy, and you play fair, but you want to win. And in order to do that, you have a team, and you got to have each player play their role. And I think the secret of being a leader is to be able to find what those talents are of the individuals and let them focus on that. Don't, this idea of moving them around, it's good for experience, which if they wish to do it, they'll move around. But hire the people for their experience and what they're good at, let them go. They make a mistake, fine, once, twice, third time, fire them. That's really simple. But you got to let them experience it like we did. And I'm sure you've had the same issue. It took us a half an hour to get this connection from India to Canada, but you were patient enough to walk me through it. I had to leave because my internet didn't work because it's on satellite at the winery. But we made it happen because we're persistent. We're not going to let it go. And we are here and had a great opportunity. And I really want to thank you for the opportunity to share this with a lot of your listeners. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, it's been a big honor hosting this show, interviewing you, getting to know about the Canadian wine industry, what you did, your contribution. I had the opportunity to browse all the content which you have written, read articles which has been published, watched numerous interviews you were a part of, even those short clips, wherein you spoke about different things which you can do with ice wine. I watched everything, and I found it absolutely stunning. I can't, it's so unbelievable, because how can one individual do so much?
It wasn't one
That is,
individual. It was a team.
yeah, it was a team. Okay, yes, yes, yes. But there is so much you had as an entrepreneur, you had this vision. And see, I'm also I'm not a big entrepreneur, but I have a small team rising. So when you transition, okay, at that, I just want to ask you, when you were transitioning, when you were doing big things, okay, I'm positive you may had some sort of fear. How did you handle that fear, and how did you push yourself forward without worrying the outcome, the hiccups you would experience? How did you manage to take that big jump or leap of faith?
I have to tell you that my identity was in Inniskillin. And Carl made the wine. I was always the face, and so they recognition. When I stopped handing out Inniskillin cards, and everybody go, "Oh my God, Inniskillin!" No matter where I was in the world, especially Japan and Asia and California, I lost my identity. So I can relate to athletes because I was a quarterback. So I can relate to these athletes who are in front of millions of people, and all of a sudden they break an arm or they break a leg or they're too old to play. They're gone. Actors, the same thing. So when you lose your identity, you have to find something else. I was fortunate that I married, because I was married to Inniskillin before I didn't have time to raise a family. And I'm always astounded by how somebody can run a business and manage a family with a number of children. I really admire that. Single moms, I don't get it. I don't know how they could do it, but I admire them for that. So I think in order to do that, you jump into something else. So I kept my roots by having a little operation making a bit of ice wine. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we do with Inniskillin, but it keeps me sort of fresh. And then I got an opportunity to do the things that I didn't have time to do when I was in Inniskillin, because I was running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. More philanthropic endeavors, mentoring for young people, making myself available whenever they need assistance, and doing the kind of things that, like even working on my property. I was there today, and I like doing hands-on because, hey, I'm Italian, I'm a farmer, I grew up learning from my father. So I do a lot of the work there myself and create some of the history of putting it together. And Debbie helped me with a lot of the, what do I call it, history of Inniskillin and the wine industry, all of it to keep for future generations for education.
Archival.
Yeah, archival, thank you.
I appreciate you sharing that. And as you correctly said, it's the team which makes it all happen. If you have the right team, if you have the right people, definitely success is inevitable. I appreciate you sharing that. Is there anything you'd like to promote on my show before we wrap this up?
I think we've covered a lot. The only thing I would suggest is I'd extend an invitation for anyone from India or anywhere all over the world that are listening. Come to Niagara. We've got a lot of things here, but come to the wine region. The agriturismo is really becoming very successful. We're learning from the Italians how to do it well. And, we're not Tuscany yet, and Napa is the same. So please come and visit. And, you can reach out to me or to Inniskillin, or, once you come here, there's a region. We have an icewine festival in the winter that, gives people an opportunity to do something in the winter here. So it's not just for summer, but it's a full season. And the harvest time, we're all too busy to pay much attention, but it's certainly worth coming down and experiencing it.
That sounds fantastic. So I wanted to actually let people know about the next week's show. So next week I'm going to be doing a show about the role of visual identities in elevating your podcast brand, and this show is scheduled on August 23rd at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to speak about how you can use branding, a bit of visual identity to make the magic happen, especially for your podcast. And I would use some of the experience which I had from my podcast, and I'll share it with you to help you grow, get good guests, have a better reach. So I mean, if you know that my podcast currently on social media is on the top 5% most shared podcast on social media. It's also on the top 30% most followed podcast in the business category. According to the recent stats, I think that number has gone down to 25 or 20%. So I think by the end of the year I should get an update on that. I wanted to personally thank you, Mr. Ziraldo, for the opportunity to spend this 90 minutes. This was spectacular, informative. And I ask any of the listeners listening to my podcast, if you're from India, do visit Mr. Ziraldo's estate, his winery or Inniskillin or the Niagara region. Enjoy that ice wine. Try that cocktail mix which he recommended. I think it's going to be spectacular. So I appreciate this very, very much. Do you have any last words before we wrap this up, Mr. Ziraldo?
Jason, I know that you're a brand expert, a branding expert. I just had the pleasure of hearing from a group of MBA students from Schulich School of Business at York University. They've just finished a year MBA program on branding and social media for Ziraldo Ice Wine and the Prosecco. So I'd be happy to share that with you. You do with it as you wish. It's, as I said, there are no secrets in the wine business. So I was approached by Schulich School of Business, and they said, we'd like to do something. And I said, teach me how to work on social media, because Debbie and I used to work with fax machines and PR, which is a whole different animal than now. We knew all the wine writers, and the world has changed. So I'll send that to you, and if you, like I said, use it as you wish. And please be critical, because I know they'll want some feedback as well. And getting it from an expert like yourself, I'm sure would help them in their education.
Absolutely. We will discuss about that offline. I want to thank each and everybody listening to us and consistently listening to us on LinkedIn and YouTube and LinkedIn audio. Do get yourself a bottle of ice wine by Mr. Ziraldo. Please try it out. I think it's amazing. I have really tried looking it up here, but it's too challenging. In fact, most people were laughing at me with the fact that when I told them it's ice wine, so they had no idea. So it was a big bonker. So I want to thank each and everybody once again. Please take care of yourself. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're in the world. Please have a fantastic day.
Cheers.